Let's put today aside and travel back about 2,000 years to the heart of one of history's greatest giants, the Roman Empire. Imagine yourself in a Roman market for a moment. Around you are the scents of spices from all over the world, silk fabrics, and exotic fruits. In your pocket sits something small, but immensely valuable, the dollar of its time, the denarius. This coin was more than just a means of payment. In 211 BC, when Hannibal was at Rome's gates, it was a piece of pure silver, minted by a nation fighting for survival. It carried the honor of Rome. This 4.2-gram, shimmering silver coin brought justice, trade, and stability wherever the Roman legions marched. Whether you were a soldier, a merchant, or a peasant, if you had a denarius, you could feed yourself from the misty shores of Britain to the scorching deserts of Egypt. Rome was so powerful that it didn't even need to stamp Rome on the coin. The purity of the silver shouted its origin, but keeping this massive machine running was incredibly expensive. Like modern states today, Rome had a vast bureaucracy, thousands of miles of roads, massive aqueducts, and most importantly, a giant army that had to be kept satisfied. Even in peacetime, the salary for these legions exceeded 100 million denarii. When war broke out, this cost doubled or tripled. Money was the lifeblood of the empire, but the blood in those veins was starting to run low. Everything was more or less on track until the reign of Emperor Augustus, because Rome was constantly expanding. Every new land conquered meant new gold mines, new taxes, and tons of war loot. However, in 9 AD, after the famous defeat against the Germanic tribes, Augustus made a decision. We stop here. This decision marked the beginning of the insidious disease in Rome's economy, the rot from within. The flow of silver from outside had been cut off, but expenses continued to rise every day. Now, let me take you into the dim palace corridor of Rome. The emperor and his advisors are gathered around a table, deep in thought. The treasury is empty. The soldiers are waiting for their pay, and the people want free bread. They consider raising taxes, but they know that excessive taxation means rebellion. There's no banking system to borrow from either. Just then, a brilliant but disastrous idea that would change the course of history is proposed. What if we thin out the silver we have? This was the ancient version of printing unbacked money in the modern world. They said, why mint every coin from pure silver? If we mix some copper into each coin, we can get twice as many coins from the same amount of silver. On paper, it looked like a perfect plan. Who would notice? Emperor Nero was one of the first to resort to this method to rebuild Rome after the Great Fire in 64 AD. He reduced the silver content of the denarius from 95% to 90%. The coins the people received were still the same size and still bore the emperor's face. Shopping continued. No one said, "Is the color of this money a bit pale?" But it was like a drug addiction. Once you started, you couldn't stop. Every emperor after Nero ran to the mint whenever they were in trouble. Especially the army was the key to power in Rome. If you wanted to remain emperor, you had to keep your soldiers happy. When Septimius Severus took the throne, he doubled soldiers' salaries in one stroke. But the treasury didn't have the money for this. The solution? Reducing the silver ratio to 50%. Imagine, that magnificent coin that was once pure silver was now a hybrid half-copper thing. It was a total death spiral. By the 270s AD, the silver content in the denarius had dropped to 0.5%. In other words, there was no such thing as a silver coin anymore, just copper slugs washed in silver. So, how did this palace game affect the people? Let's teleport to a marketplace in the mid-3rd century AD. Here is Livia, a merchant. Livia is no fool. Thousands of denarii have passed through her hands over the years. One day, she notices that the new coins don't shine like the old ones, and they don't make that solid thud when they hit the table. After sitting in a pocket for a while, they even turn greenish. Livia thinks, if there's less silver in this money, why should I still sell a bag of wheat for 10 denarii? Now, I want 20. This is exactly where the monster we call inflation is born. As the state prints more money, the value of the currency drops and prices skyrocket. Do you know who this hit the hardest? Those with fixed incomes, the ordinary citizens, and the much-feared soldiers. Imagine a legionnaire. He supports his life with the salary he saved while fighting on the border. Where he once could buy a field with his pay, now he can barely afford a few months of supplies. Angry whispers start echoing in the military camps. In this chaos, social justice was also destroyed. The newly printed worthless money reached the palace and the wealthy first. Knowing the currency would lose value, they immediately invested in real assets, like land and grain. Things got so out of control that Emperor Diocletian said, "Enough," in 301 AD. He issued the most comprehensive price control edict in history, fixing the prices of over 1,000 products. If you sold a chicken or a pair of shoes for more than the set price, the penalty was death. But economics doesn't work with police measures. Merchants, rather than selling goods at the state-mandated price, began selling them secretly under the table. The black market exploded. Shelves in official markets went empty. People finally stopped trusting these worthless pieces of metal altogether. Rome regressed thousands of years from a modern economy back to a barter economy. Now, let's slowly return to the present. What does this story of Rome tell us? In fact, history is showing us our own reflection in a mirror. Today, states may not mix copper into silver, but pressing the print money button is much easier. Banknotes, digital credits, trillions printed out of thin air. The names change, but the math remains the same. Rome did not collapse by sword blows or the falling of its walls. It finished itself off in its mints by destroying the trust in the money in its citizens' pockets. Let Rome's silent collapse be a warning to us all. Real wealth is not in metal or paper, but in honesty and production.